who I am shapes my work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm new to the scene and being in the role of Assistant Athletic Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Villanova University because I recognized my purpose over the years as a school counselor. And what led me to become a school counselor? Well, growing up in Syracuse, New York, we didn't have a lot. And, as a Black girl, I recognized that there were some differences between the way I was raised and other folks who were not Black or other folks who had more financial means. And when I was growing up in Syracuse, New York, my dad was an alcoholic, and most of the men in my family and many of the people in my family were drug addicts. And that really shaped how I saw the world. I didn't really see a lot of healthy, thriving Black folks. Although I grew up in a Black neighborhood, mostly Black and Latinx community, I didn't see a lot of that. So that sort of shaped how I saw Black people there. But then I had this other narrative from my grandparents. My grandparents migrated, both of them, from Alabama to Syracuse, New York. And so we had this Southern ways and culture about us. On top of that, I had, which I'm now mostly leaning into, I'm biracial, multiple cultural experience. So my dad was adopted by a white family when he was 1 year old, and he and 7 of his siblings were adopted. 5 of them were Native Americans, and so those 5 really leaned into the Native American culture. So I had this dominant culture of poor Black folk in Syracuse, New York, and then I had this white experience with my adopted white family, and then I had this indigenous experience on the reservation of Onondaga Nation, and then some of the values that my aunts and my dad sort of leaned into and learned, but we didn't grow up on the res. So I had all these dynamics happening and impacting me, and then my dad died when I was 14, and so that really impacted me mental health-wise. And I went to my school counselor for some support. I didn't really understand what was wrong with me. I just recognized that I was sad all the time, but being a Black girl, I was always raised to be tough and strong and to persevere. And so I went to the counselor for some support, and that counselor couldn't help me. They didn't get it. Then I became this really talented athlete, and I became one of the best runners in New York, probably in the country. And I went and I started getting recruited in my sophomore year, and I went to the counselor and said, I want to go to college. Education is important to my family. No one else went to college, and I want to go to college. Can you help me? I'm being recruited. And they couldn't help me with that. And so then I came to Villanova University, and I said, I'm going to be a school counselor, right? I'm going to pursue this. That's going to be my major. And I found out that they didn't have that major at Villanova. And so that was almost like one of the experiences as a first generation college student that hit me. Oh, there's this big gap. I didn't even know to look for the major. I just thought you go to college, you studied what you wanted, and then that would happen. So that was one dynamic. And then also I recognized that for the first time being in a large environment with white folks, right? And everybody's happy. What was their upbringing like that they just seem happy-go-lucky all of the time? And so that was my first experience with white folks, my first experience on a college campus, and I didn't have any guidance from my family to help me navigate that. I felt very connected to my track and field family. It was very international team, very diverse team at the time, small team. My coaches were Black, and I felt very safe in that environment. And I do believe that because I felt safe at Villanova and that environment, it helped me to sort of thrive and persevere throughout my time here. It took some time for me to unearth and uncover and bring into consciousness the impact of not only my biracial background and how that's impacted me as a woman, but then having to have this double consciousness as a Black woman, coming from my Syracuse, New York family to my Villanova family, white family, predominantly white family, having to navigate that space in order to get the education that was so important to me and my family. So when 2020 happened and and, 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 George Floyd was murdered, I the need to be doing racial equity work became deeply, deeply personal, beyond what it was for me before. Because at this time, I had 2 sons. I married a black man who I call a rebel. He's not one to back down from a courageous conversation. He's not one to back down from a fight. And he's one who will always stand up for justice. And so then here's my husband, this black man. And then when 2020 came about, I had my black son, who was 5 years old at the time. And then I was pregnant with my other son. And that's when I became like sad. And I thought, what can I do? So at first I felt a little bit hopeless. Like, what can we do? And, this is never going to change, right? People are not going to change. The system's not going to change. But I recognized that I had to be a warrior because I had to protect my family. And so then I became more fierce in the work. It's essential for my boys to know who they are and where they come from. It's essential that they know the world in which they live so that they can navigate that. And I don't want them to navigate it in fear. I want them to navigate it in full understanding and knowing, intellectually knowing, also knowing in their heart that this is the world that we've chosen to live in, this society, the United States of America, if this is where we choose to live for the rest of our lives, that they need to know the impact of racism and how that will impact not only where they live, but also who they are, how it's going to impact them as black men in this society, so that they can continue the fight. The message I would give to the young person who's struggling with their identity is that it's okay. It's okay to struggle with your identity. And if you're a black person struggling with your identity, it's intentional that you would struggle with your identity. So I'm not surprised. And to know that it's okay, and that if you're open to learning more about yourself, learning about how society has impacted you, then you will find your way. Just give yourself permission to do that, to bring into consciousness and to bring to light how society has impacted you, and to lean into who you are and what your purpose is. And that in of itself is a journey, as I am still unearthing that for myself. Like I said before, I only identified as black to people. I recently started saying I'm biracial, although I knew all along I was biracial. I knew all along I had a white and indigenous culture that I practiced at home. But I didn't feel, people didn't see me that way, so I didn't lean into it. But now I know who I am, and I'm still unearthing and uncovering that. And I'm 40-something years old. And so it's a journey, and it's okay, because like I said, it's intentional that I would be confused about my identity.